Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. Today, we're tackling a really foundational question from the New Testament, one that has sparked centuries of debate. Let's dive right in.
So here's the puzzle that the Apostle Paul takes on in his letter to the Romans. And for the early believers, you got to understand this wasn't just some casual question. No, it was a huge deal. It felt like it was calling into question whether God's promises could even be trusted. Okay, so how on earth did Paul tackle this massive dilemma? Well, according to the source material we're looking at, he didn't just fire off a quick answer. He laid out this incredibly detailed, comprehensive argument that spans 3 whole chapters of his letter.
And that right there is such a crucial starting point. See, if you want to get the conclusion, you have to follow the logic from the very beginning. Paul isn't just throwing out random points. He is meticulously building a case, piece by piece.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The entire solution, the key to the whole puzzle, actually hinges on a very specific and deliberate choice of words. It's all about understanding a distinction Paul makes. So, according to our source, Paul intentionally switches up his vocabulary. You'll notice when he says Jews, he's often talking about the ethnic or racial group. But, and this is the key, when he uses the word Israel, he's pointing to a completely different group, the true, spiritual inheritors of God's promises. So, who exactly is in this spiritual group? Well, Paul gives them a name, the remnant. And this right here is the absolute core of his argument. We're talking about a group that's defined not by their family tree or their DNA, but simply by their faith. And that leads us to this powerful summary of the point. The promises of God haven't failed because they were never promises to the whole race, but to the remnant. See? That's the crucial takeaway. Paul solves the dilemma by explaining that God's promises were never made to every single ethnic descendant of Abraham. They were always meant for the spiritual remnant. And if that's the case, well, then the promises hadn't failed at all. They were perfectly on track. Now, this redefinition, it directly confronts a really common misunderstanding. This whole idea that maybe God has different ways of salvation for different groups of people. And this really forces us to ask a tough question, doesn't it? Does any ethnic group, any group at all, get a divine pass into the kingdom just because of who they are? Is salvation some kind of group entitlement based on your heritage, or is it something else entirely? And the argument presented in the material is that Scripture points again and again to one single unified path. There aren't multiple doors or special side entrances into the kingdom. There's just one narrow gate for everyone. And this slide just illustrates the point perfectly. It's not about your physical descent if you're a Jew, and it's not a free pass if you're a Gentile, a non-Jew. The source argues that there is only one criterion that applies to everybody, no exceptions: individual faith in the Messiah. Okay, so with all that groundwork laid, let's turn to the famous phrase that's really at the heart of this whole debate. We're going to see how Paul's carefully built argument brings it all to a really powerful conclusion. I'm willing to bet you've heard this verse before, right? And so all Israel shall be saved. It gets pulled out of its context all the time, but when you see it inside the flow of Paul's 3-chapter explanation, this line takes on a very specific, very consistent meaning. So this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who is this Israel that will be saved? If Paul has already spent all this time defining Israel as the spiritual remnant and not the entire ethnic nation, then who exactly is included when he says all Israel? Well, according to the source, all Israel is simply the grand total of everyone who belongs to that remnant. It's the full number. You've got the remnant of believers from Judah, believers from those dispersed northern tribes, and, believers from all the other nations, the Gentiles. In short, it's the complete body of every single person, from every background, who is united to Christ by faith. And this distinction is absolutely crucial. The source is really emphatic on this point. Paul is not laying out some kind of end times roadmap for a modern nation state. What he's doing is giving a theological explanation of salvation, of how God saves his people, the true spiritual Israel. And so we end on this really provocative thought from the source material, which basically frames the entire debate as a choice. Any other interpretation subordinates the cross to the bloodline. It forces you to think, doesn't it? Is salvation ultimately about faith in the work of the cross, or is it about your ancestry? It leaves us to consider which one of those truly has the final say.